This little beauty is a Toshiba satellite C50D-B-120. I bought this secondhand for €25. Apparently it is not powering on. I have no power adapter with it, and it's not the regular Toshiba power adapter size, so I have no choice but to open it up and see if I can inject voltage onto the board to try and get some power onto it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it out, I'm going to take the board out, and I'm going to take some pictures and we'll get it onto the screen. And this is our motherboard. Now, I had a look around this pretty thoroughly and I cannot see any signs of physical damage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring some power to this board. Now, as I mentioned, I don't have the particular power adapter for this. However, I can see down here that there is a DC input jack, and as you can see, it's clearly marked black wire and red wire. So I know where to inject. I introduce my DC power supply, and I connect my black wire to the black wire, and I connect my red wire to the red wire. I actually use crocodile clips for doing this, which you'll see in a second. So what I did was I switched it on and set it to 19 volts, which is the power that this laptop accepts. And when I did that, it pulled 0.012 of an amp. However, it kept dropping to 6 milliamps, back up to 12 milliamps, back down to 6. So it appears that there is some sign of a fault here. Let me just show you what it's doing. Okay, so in the real world, as you can see, I have my black and red crocodile clips connected up to the wires for that DC jack. And when I press the power on, I have it set to 19 volts and it's drawing 12 milliamps. But as you will see, that starts fluctuating between 12 and 6 milliamps, which it shouldn't be doing really. Now, I've got an LED on the front. I'm not sure if that's meant to be on all the time when it's working and not working, but as you'll see here, the power button does appear to be working. So I press the power button and immediately starts drawing between 300 and 400 milliamps. However, even with my VGA connected, I'm not getting any output. The processor is starting to warm up a bit, but I can never get it to produce a display. Now, given that our power button is working, I think that our main power rail is fine. I think our 19 volts is making it through the 2 input MOSFETs and onto the current sensor resistor. But just let's follow the path in case there's any ambiguity over how this works. So we've got our positive voltage coming in here. We've got 2 pins that connect to a fuse. So this is obviously our positive input. So let's mark the path there. So first it comes onto a fuse. After the fuse, it's connecting to these 2 inductors right here. Then through the 2 inductors and onto the drain pins of the first MOSFET. So this MOSFET is an in-channel MOSFET, and I'm going to mark out the pins on that now. So you've got 4 drain pins on one side, 3 source pins here, and a gate pin that controls the MOSFET to switch it on and off. So presuming that our 19 volts is coming through here, that then comes onto the source pins, the 3 source pins right here of a second MOSFET. Let's mark out those pins and mark out the path. And if it comes through that MOSFET, it then comes onto our current sense resistor here, and after the current sense resistor, this is our main power rail. So if our 19 volts is making it through all of these, we should be measuring 19 volts at this point here. So let's do that. So with my multimeter in volts DC in a 20 volt range, I place my black probe to ground and place my red probe to that current sense resistor, and I measure 19.0 volts. So our 19 volts is making it successfully through our fuse, through the 2 inductors and through the 2 MOSFETs. And just in case anybody is curious as to what the gate voltages should be on these MOSFETs when they're turned on, I measure at the gate pin and I find it measures 24.95. So that is the voltage on the gate pin when the MOSFET is switched on. And just to confirm that we also have 24.95 volts on the gate pin of the second N channel MOSFET when it's switched on. What do we know at this point? Well, we know that our main power rail is good because I'm measuring 19.0 volts at the current sense resistor here. I know that my power button is good because in the earlier video you saw that when I press this button, the laptop appears to power on. We also know that the Super I/O is also working to some extent because it receives the power button and triggers on a number of the secondary circuits. We know that it appears to be power on because it draws 400 milliamps when I press this button, and the CPU appears to warm up. I have also tried using different DDR3 DIMMs. I have a number of these that I know are good. I've tried a number of them in this laptop, but it makes no difference. No matter what I've done up to this point, I cannot get a display either from the VGA port or from the HDMI. So what do we try next? Well, what I decided to do next was to take the voltage measurements at all of the inductors on the secondary circuits on this laptop. So I introduced my multimeter in volts DC in a 20 volt range. I placed my black probe to ground, and starting with this inductor here, PL1803. What the voltage is sort of given away in the name of the inductor really, but I place my red probe to that and I measure 1.80 volts. So I'm going to do all of the rest of these, measure all the rest of the voltages on all of the other inductors, and I'm going to put them on screen now. And on screen now I am showing all of the voltages that I measured on those inductors while the laptop was powered on, drawing 400 milliamps but showing no display. So the first one where we started here is we've 1.8 volts on this. I've no schematic for this, so we're just going to have to guess which power rail each of these inductors are on. This is probably for the chipset, 1.8 volts. Down here we're measuring 1.375 volts, which is going to be for our DDR3 RAM. This one here is on the battery charging rail, so this is currently 2.4 volts. I think this goes up if the battery is actually connected. We won't know for sure until we connect the battery, but I think that's fine either way. This is our 3.3 volts. This is not an always on voltage. When the laptop is switched off, there is nothing on this. This only appears when the laptop is powered on. This one here is 0.96 volts. I'm not sure what this is for, but it's a stable 0.96 volts, so I've nothing to indicate that there's anything wrong with this rail. Up here we have 0.8 volts and 1 volt. I think these are associated with our CPU. And lastly we have 5.06 volts on this inductor right here. So what I decided to do next was to power off the laptop, disconnect it from all power sources, and take the resistance measurements at each of those inductors. And these are the measurements that I took. So as you can see, there is nothing less than 23 ohms. 23 ohms is for the CPU, but there is certainly no indications of any shorts or any faults from the resistance measurements there. Next, I want to check our bias IC. Now, our bias is this little chip here, this little win bond. So I pulled up a schematic for this, and this is what I see. So this gives me the pinouts. Pretty much all the time with this sort of package, it's pin 8 that you should be getting 3.3 volts on, but I've just confirmed this. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 8 is VC. So we should have an input voltage of about 3.3 volts on this. Now, if I map those pinouts onto this, this is what they look like. So as you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and we should be getting 3.3 volts on pin 8 of this bias IC. So let's check for that now. With my multimeter set to volts DC once again, I place my black probe to ground and place my red probe to pin 8 of our bias IC, and I measure 3.35 volts. So that's good. The bias IC is getting the correct voltage. Now we've had quite a few laptops on the channel with this symptom. The laptop powers on, but you just cannot get any display. So what I've done here is I've compiled a checklist from a number of different sources, books and other videos and that, and these are the things that I need to try in this scenario, and hopefully we can improve the success rate. So number one, to check board for spills or damage. We need to check all the ports, that's USB port, video, etc., for damage or maybe crossed pins. We need to disconnect every single peripheral device like the Wi-Fi cards, the hard drive, everything. We need to try it with an external monitor. We need to try it with different DDR3L memory. We need to verify that the main power rail is what it should be. It's 19 volts for this laptop. We need to check the voltages at each of the inductors. We need to check for the voltage at the bias IC, and then we need to reprogram the bias IC. I searched around for the bias and I couldn't find a free one, so I had to sign up for a month with these guys, Bias Downloads, and sure enough they had what they say is a working copy of Toshiba Satellite C50D-B-120 working bias. So with my hot air gun I desoldered the bias IC from the board. I soldered it onto my well-weathered plug-in board for my BIOS programmer. I opened AS Programmer, chose the BIOS IC, and then I selected to read it just to back up the original. I loaded in the working BIOS that I got from biosdownloads.com and wrote that to the IC. And this is the laptop with the new BIOS installed, and unfortunately it's doing the same thing. So that's where I'm going to leave it with this one, guys. Apparently there is an EC BIOS on this that can be reprogrammed as well, and I have the BIOS file for that. However, I don't know which IC it is, and to be honest I think it's pretty low percentage chance in any case. These are becoming very frustrating, these power on, no display symptom laptops. I'm not really having much success with them, but look, hopefully by putting together the checklist from the other books and videos that I've read, it leaves me better arms that when I get another one of these, that eventually I'm going to reach the point that I'm going to try all the right things and get one of these to work. But it is frustrating, and you sometimes feel like you're not making any progress at all. I sometimes feel like I'm getting better at making videos, but actually not getting better at fixing stuff. That's the frustration in doing this. But I'm not going to be deterred, and I'm going to have another video next week, and I will see you for that, hopefully.